Yeah, thank you for obliging me. I want to, as we said, we will just start without wasting further time. Um, as you can see, our panelists are already seated, but we still have, I think, one or two more persons, there. Okay, Josh, can I stand here? Okay. Okay. All right. So, okay, but let me introduce the panelists. We have to my left, Professor Mojuba Olufunke Okome. She's a professor of political science, African and women's studies here in the U.S. Could we give her a round? We also have Tazreen Hussein. She's a gender advisor for Center for Civilians in Conflict. She's the one in the middle. Can we give her a round? And of course, my able executive director, Mr. Awal Ibrahim Musa Rafsanjani. He's the executive director of CISLAC, a convener. So yes, we also have, well, not within the panel, representative of the permanent rep, that's the permanent representative of Nigeria to the UN, in the person of Mr. Awan. We have also some other very able, wonderful participants in our list that I don't have their names. So please kindly pardon me if I didn't mention your name. Sister, you're well recognized, Sister Ngozi, and then every other partner that is here. You're all very much.
You're a board member.
Of course, our able board member. Yeah, because he's holding the camera. Mr. Francis is our board member for the CISLAC US. Thank you so much for coming. So yeah, without so much ado, I think we will just start. If you have this, you can actually look at it. We'll just follow it the way it is. We'll give our able executive director, Madam Awal Musa Rafsanjani, the space to actually give the opening remark, after which we will take the welcome addresses. So, can we have your...
Yeah, I can sit down.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a lot of plenty, at least everybody will be here. Thank you very much for coming. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to this important event. Our gathering today serves as an enabling platform for different stakeholders and international community to interact in preparing holistic solutions to the current trends and challenges confronting adequate, accessible, and effective multi-stakeholder approach toward promoting social security for African women. This event is primarily aimed at provoking critical discussion and harnessing potential for what will ultimately lead to showcasing the plight of African women to the international community and exploring gender-relevant issues to promote social security for women in Africa. It has become continuously imperative to keep the issue of women in general and African women in particular on the front burner of international discourse. The government have truly not met expectation of people in terms of delivering on some international treaties and made on behalf of women. Many African countries, have not actually fulfilled these commitments they have entered, and therefore, many countries have discovered that they have not only rectified but implemented some of these treaties that will have gone a long way in terms of ameliorating the plight of African women. Despite the progressive policy commitment and institutional framework on gender equality and women's empowerment, implementation remains slow and inconsistent. To date, some countries in Africa are still battling with the domestication of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, particularly known as CEDAW, a treaty adopted since 1979 by the United Nations General Assembly. This treaty is described as the Bill of Rights for Women and has been ratified by only 189 countries. Most African countries that have demonstrated CIDO are yet to fully implement the provision, hence the need for other social development laws for women, including gender policies, which are not even taken seriously. Equally, the Protocol of African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa has not secured universal ratification. It is pertinent to note that no nation can fully attain sustainable development without including women, girls, and all other vulnerable groups. The cost of non-inclusion is shocking. According to the World Bank report released in 2018, countries are losing towards 160 trillion US dollars in wealth because of differences in lifetime earning between women and men. The extent of the problems is disproportionately more serious in Africa. UNDP, in its African Human Development Report for 2016, says gender inequality is costing sub-African countries on average of 95 billion yearly. We must get away with gender discrimination and misguided behaviors based on sometimes on cultural and religious misinterpretation. For instance, the World Bank gender data portal shows that 76.3% of women in Mali and 92.1% in Guinea believe a man is justified in beating his wife if she goes out without telling him. We must challenge these ingrained beliefs which stand in the way of socio-economic progress of our society. This is really institutionalization of feministic violence, because there's nowhere this even in any of the structure where it says that you should just be beating your wife. What of the people are in the process? So I think we need to do a lot of advocacy to stop this bad behavior. Indeed, it is a major disservice to African nations to overlook and sometimes discriminate an integral part of community. In terms of political and socio-economic development, women have constantly been sidelined in Africa. We can explore global economic impact of women in Africa and traditional structures that once provided differing levels of social security for African women. Women in decision-making position and as political influencers must be actively promoted. There is a growing evidence that women's leadership in political decision-making processes improves them. If given the chance, women have demonstrated that they can succeed even in the most politically combative environment. They are the best champion of the issues of gender equality, such as elimination of gender-based violence, parental leave and child care, pension, gender inequality laws, and electoral reforms. Look, if we really want to deal decisively with issues of promoting, and protecting women in Africa, there's no way. We must have all this enabling policy framework in place and implemented. Just recently, we had election in Nigeria. The number we had, elected, in the both House of Representatives and the Senate, as well as the State House of Assembly, has basically declined. That shows that we are not even making the progress. Even the little gain we made in the last election of 2015, we have now degenerated by not allowing women to be on board. This is largely because of the way and manner in which political violence, in which also the exuberant fee for the registration or for the forms to obtain is something that any decent woman can have that kind of asset. So what happened is that those looters who have looted, they have made so much money that they can now deprive an honest living woman from participating in the political processes, because they have not stolen and they are not stealing, so they cannot afford this, and because they cannot pay money to kill people, so they have been alienated. We cannot continue in this kind of trade. we have to change the narratives. And the only way to change the narrative is to ensure that there's a electoral transparency, there's a internal democracy in our political party system that will enable women to participate actively. Otherwise, it will be extremely difficult for any decent person, not only women, even men that are decent, to really be involved in the political processes in Africa. The overall goal of this event is to identify the central needs required for full social security and human development, attainment of rights, and the empowerment of African women, and especially women in conflict. Highlights of this event include exploring social security challenges, aligning African women with specific focus on empowerment, social safety net, stresslessness, maternal and child health, and nutrition challenges, contemporary critical issues of internal displacement and domestic violence against African women, and how this affects their social security and development, including their children. There will be a recommendation and opinion from the international community which will further enrich the discourse. Of course, we have a very distinguished professor. Professor Kwame is not just a political scientist, but she has been a woman activist. She had actually, written extensively about women, issue not only in Africa but globally. So we are privileged to have her seated, and she's going to be the key, presenter of this today's event. On the 8th of March this year, and indeed every other year, United Nations and the world at large celebrate women's achievements. Our very own women are known to be very strong and resilient. In the minds of various storms, they stand tall and continue to strive and attain greater heights than their male counterparts in some cases. CISLAC, on her part, has engaged several regional, national, and sub-national legislators in the past especially, and even now currently we are intending to continue to do. CISLAC believes that only through serious engagement with policy and legislative that can this glory situation be overturned. Hence the need to continuously engage all relevant stakeholders to draw political will necessary for prioritizing funding for health and specifically nutrition, which impacts women and children. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that a lot needs to be done in order to promote social security for African women. African development has for a long time been one-sided. I urge for this change of our strategy of engendering development by empowering women socially, financially, politically. Empowering women will further prosper us to the level of unprecedented development and hold a brilliant future for African nation. I call on all present to use this platform provided by today's meeting to deliberate on effective ways to address issues raised. Recommendations are well appreciated. The report of this meeting will once again be published throughout our online social media platform and traditional media, both locally and internationally. It will also be disseminated widely to our various stakeholders. My sincere appreciation goes to the Nigerian Permanent Representative to the United Nations for Nigeria for his continued support to CISLAC, the Center for Civilian in Conflict for support, and every other partner, friends of CISLAC, and special guests that supported this event. I urge all the present to fully participate and contribute effectively to the issues and discourse that will unfold this meeting. Once again, I thank you. And I'm sorry, maybe I've taken longer than necessary, but that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We want to quickly take the next, the welcome address by the permanent rep, ably represented by Mr. Awan. Yes, please go. Thank
I'm
you.
representing my
Yes.
Yes. I can be sitting now.
Yes.
So, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm directed to deliver this welcome address on behalf of the permanent representative in Nigeria to the United Nations, Professor Tijani Mohammed Bandi, who is fully engaged in other CSW commitments. So whatever I will read here is coming from him. the Executive Director of Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, Your Excellencies, the panelists, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the onset, let me express my sincere appreciation for the honor I have been given to deliver the welcome address in this meeting, which will deliberate on promoting social security for African women in conflict. Therefore, allow me to welcome all of you to this important gathering and assure you that your contribution to the development of reliable recommendations on the plight of African women is paramount to the achievement of national development, strategies, sustainable development, and MDGs. This should be the task of us all, the government, the private sector, NGOs, and development partners. Despite the vital role of women in preventing conflict and helping to forge peace, they were far too often prevented from participating fully in political development processes to the detriment of the society as a whole. To that end, I urge all participants to listen to the noble speakers, civil society, particularly women groups, in all the deliberations, especially on the paradigm shift of including women in conflict resolution, prevention, and peace building in order to make peace negotiations more diverse. In the same vein, we need to continue advocating for gender equality and women's empowerment and elevate women's voices, as well as to point out the role of women in countering violent extremism and terrorism. Nevertheless, several areas of concern and stagnation, especially on gender balance, still remain. So it is therefore vital to eliminate barriers to women's participation in peace-related activities and ensure their full inclusion during the formation of implementation of early warning systems, as well as in peace-building efforts at all levels. May I take this opportunity to assure you that the government of Nigeria is committed to supporting the empowerment of women and agrees that the commitment to end poverty, protect society, and ensure prosperity for all will only be achieved if developmental initiatives consider the unique needs, knowledge, and potentials of women and girls. It is my expectations that this side event will assist in generating ideas and activate live discussions among the participants in order to improve the quality of life for women, families, and the community as a whole. I wish to thank all the participants and speakers for this event. Let me once again take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to CISLAC, the organizers of this event, for inviting me to this occasion. It is my expectation that participants will find the occasion useful and contribute to the discussions to be followed. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. This is very, very concise and very punchy and powerful. Thank you so much. We will take the first presentation for the day from the keynote speaker, the keynote address actually, from Professor Mojibola Olufunke Okome.
I have this PowerPoint because they wanted the PowerPoint. I don't like doing PowerPoint. How much time? Actually, like 2 minutes?
You can have 3.
Okay. Well, so promoting social security for African women, what are the gender relevant issues, is what I was asked to talk about. However, I think it's better to talk about social protection, because social protection is a broader category than social security. And then also with social security systems, people are expected to contribute, in some scenarios. And I think the essence of social protection is that one would like to broaden access to economic opportunities and to, dignity, as well as upward mobility for people who might be indigent and who do not have the social capital that would enable for them to advance their lives. So when I think about this, well, I think about the fact that there's strong international support for social security and social protection. And this is of long-standing, grounding in international relations. So if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if you look at a lot of the conventions that many states, including African states, are signatories to, you'd find in them the idea that equality is a right that all human beings ought to have. And then the Universal Declaration actually talked about the right to social security. It talks about enhancing people's capacity to realize economic, social, and cultural rights, and that the realization of these rights is indispensable to people's dignity and to their development as full human beings. Then also, so this thing has a lot of gender insensitive language, but it does endorse the idea that social security and social protection are human rights. And they have long-standing validity in the international community. If you look at the International Labour Organization, it's actually been working on social security since at least 1919, by, according to its own records. Then, if we look at the ICPD, the International Conference on Population and Development of 1994 in Cairo, the final document also talked about social protection as international obligations. Then the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, also follow the lead of the ILO by saying that social protection, social security, equitable access to social services that help people to gain human security and human dignity, it builds capital. So investing in these social protection measures actually enables for countries to profit tremendously. So it's not, just doing charity that doesn't amount to anything. So there's a consensus that we have to protect people from who are vulnerable, who are threatened by conditions that are sometimes out of their control, because there are people in crisis that's a result of war or ethno-religious reasons causing the war, or their environmental issues, So I have to move quickly, but there's a consensus. We need gender equality, we need gender equity, and we must provide, so if you look at this, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, it also talks about this. So when we want to make rights-based arguments for gender equality and equity, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, CEDAW, is what actually provides the deepest grounding. So you find a lot of international instruments referencing the rights that CEDAW talks about. So Article 1 is very important. It talks about no distinction, no exclusion, no restriction on the basis of sex that has the effect of impairing or nullifying the enjoyment and exercise of rights by women, irrespective of their marital status, and on a basis of equality of men and women, that people have the right to enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms in all spheres of life. And this is a very strong claim. And every woman should actually memorize CIDO, and use it as one of their claims, So CIDO it's the key to the rights-based claims. And I'm going to move on because, the SDG goals, in referencing CIDO, says the goal that the world has is to leave no one behind. And people have been talking about eliminating poverty, right? I think there's a lot of cooking of figures because, there are people who have been lifted out of poverty. Actually, China is doing much better in accomplishing this goal than any place else in the world. We still have the situation in most of the world where you have tremendous economic growth, but also high levels of inequality. And when you have those high levels of inequality, it means that you might have deep grinding poverty simultaneously as you have people who are multi-billionaires. Okay? And this is something, so part of what we'll have to do as a world is economic redistribution. We can't leave it to chance. But so how do you accomplish this? I think when you're looking at social protection programs, it enables one to have a bit of a roadmap that makes this possible. So when you look at gender equality as a struggle that the world has mobilized and women are leading the charge, you'll find that we've made advancements. I mean, there are a lot of diseases that used to kill people routinely that are now controllable. We have educational gains. More women, more girls are going to school. More women are taking leadership positions, but it is not enough. There's still a gender pay gap, and I say a power gap also. So, according to the World Economic Forum, you'll have 202 years before we close the gender pay gap. This is unacceptable, So, the gender power gap, nobody has done it yet. That is, what's the male-female disparity in decision making and governance. But, so when you look, women want credit, they can't get credit at the same level as men. They don't have enough collateral to put down in order to get them the big amounts of money that you need to establish big business. They don't have, in many places in the world, women don't have equal rights to property ownership as men. They don't have as much education as men, because when it comes down to a choice in poor families, they would send their boy to school and keep the girl back, and the girl would have the burden of fetching firewood and water, making food, taking care of babies, and because they're training her to become a mother who is working like a jackass all the time. So when you see things like employment insecurity, hazardous work, low wages, no social protection, people who are less educated, who are at higher risk of being trafficked and forced into labor and being forced into marriage, including child marriage, and also being subjected to harmful practices, is going to be a woman. And this has to change. So when we're talking about the kind of social protections that are necessary, it has to do with economic rights, it has to do with social rights, and it has to do with political rights. Okay, so some of the issues, I don't know if you can see, some of the issues involved are making sure that we put our action where our mouth is, and guarantee substantive equality, that is concrete, real, measurable equality for women by eliminating, like Senior says, all kinds of inequality and discrimination. So women have historically been disadvantaged in families and communities. I gave an example before. There's a lot of gender-based violence in families, and women get the brunt of it. There's also impeded access to justice because people can't afford it, because there's poor representation, because people sometimes are intimidated into not pursuing justice for themselves. There's also intersectional discrimination, race, class, gender, and also other kinds of minorities that women might belong to might make them even more denied the rights that are due them. So and when people mobilize and they get on the streets, they're penalized, So it's not unknown for guns to be turned at women, or, women are subjected to brutality because they're protesting and demanding rights. And also, there's a significant amount of socioeconomic inequality that disproportionately affects women. And reproductive health and sexual health rights are low priorities in most places. And even some countries that give assistance, they weaponize these assistance and punish organizations that want to provide a full panoply of reproductive rights to women. So family law is also discriminatory in many countries against women. And when you have a situation of conflict and political instability, or you have national or global economic crisis, then the pain is even more significant. So if we're talking about social protection policies, then, conventionally, countries around the world, and majority of them tend to be in the global north, but increasingly, beginning with enthusiastic embrace of some of these policies in Latin America, and then also in Asian countries after the 1997 financial crisis, there's many more developing countries, including African countries, have taken on these policies. And I have a list of all the African policies for social protection that I could find, but we are not going to get to it because I don't want to hog the time. So you can have labor market interventions where you help people get employment. You can have social insurance. You abate risk by providing insurance in case of sickness, in case of disability, in case of injury, in case of age, where people they have declined capacity to work. Then you can have social assistance. I'm moving on, I think. Stop me, just feel like this now. So I was asked to speak to these 5 areas of on women, African women's social protection. And I did. So I think Rafsanjani would share my paper with people, because it's very, the scenario is very grim. Although we cannot say that progress is not being made. Class matters. So wealthy women and middle class women are better off than poor women. And majority of the people who are poor are women. So what are we going to really concretely do to have inclusive development is a question that we have to ask. Then these are things that need resources. So if the world is serious about this, what kind of resources are we devoting to these issues? Then what kind of systems do we have, bureaucratic systems, to implement them? Are they efficient? Are they committed? Do they have the political will to do what needs to be done? A lot of times, people who should give protection are themselves predators. You have situations where people are internally displaced people in camps, and some of the people who are supposed to give them assistance would exploit sex for food. Or, you have sometimes even staff of international agencies like the UN doing a lot of predatory kind of victimization of people that they should ordinarily be helping. So we have to stop this, And when they are whistleblowers, we shouldn't punish the whistleblower and let the perpetrator go free. So I think I'm going to stop because I'm being asked to. But these are very important issues. And we need to, if we say that, gender equality matters, gender equity matters, we must put resources to it. We must also, there's a job also for people have to make demands on their governments. That if we say we have democracies, we must organize, we must push the people that we vote for or didn't vote for, to do what they ought to do, because every country has a constitution that guarantees that the welfare of the people is the primary responsibility of the government. And then, in many instances, governments are very cavalier about, living up to this responsibility. So the demand has to be made, and it has to be made, and it has to be made. Agitation on the streets, and also ensuring that we have the kind of bureaucracies that are necessary. And then international organizations that want to help, they must really also step up and do better. Thank you very much.
Oh, please, let's give a warm round of applause to Professor Kobe. Yeah, if you need her papers, you can actually let us know. We can share with you.
Yes, please.
Would that be good?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you once more, Prof. I'm so sorry, Tazwin. We've actually eaten into your time. I don't know how you're going to do it, but you need to really hurry up. Okay.
I'll just talk
Would
really
you like
fast.
to stand?
No, I can do it.
Okay,
That's
great.
Yeah.
Great.
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today and to join this wonderful panel of discussants. Just so you have some background, the Center for Civilians in Conflict, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of civilians in conflict. So we work directly with and build the capacity of policymakers, armed actors, and communities affected by conflict to provide practical solutions that prevent, mitigate, and respond to civilian harm. So when we talk about protection, we focus on the physical protection of civilians. And I think it's an important distinction to make because it is foundational to the other wider social protections that we've all been discussing over this last week. It's foundational to those other understandings of protection, and it's also where security actors can have the most impact based on their skills and their experience. So we do this by combining research, policy advocacy, technical assistance to reduce civilian harm, by documenting harm to communities and analyzing its causes, advising parties to conflict on practical tools to prevent and respond to civilian harm. We advocate for the adoption and implementation of solutions to those problems that we've identified, and we provide assistance to military actors to track, investigate, and make amends for the harm that they cause, and provide them with targeted training and education on best practices and protection. At the same time, we work with local communities in conflict to help them strengthen self-protection mechanisms and advocate for better protection from local and international security forces. So our approach is built on the basis that parties to an armed conflict have a responsibility and interest to prevent and address civilian harm, and we see that security actors are actually the primary duty bearers of civilian protection. At the same time, we recognize that civilians are not merely victims of armed conflict, but they are active participants in its mitigation and its resolution. In communities in conflict, they develop their own means of protection when government services and other security providers aren't doing so. And so we want to recognize that and support them in those efforts where possible. When it comes to women in conflict, we all know that women, men, boys, and girls experience conflict differently. This is codified in UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and is formally recognized by countries that have made commitments to the resolution, including Nigeria, where we operate. And given these experiences, for us, this also means that women, men, boys, and girls have different protection concerns. We often see the roles of men and women shifting in conflict. Traditionally, we think, men are the protectors of the family, the breadwinners, and women are the childbearers and the caretakers. But in many cases, we see in conflict when men either leave to fight or are kidnapped or are targeted. When that happens, that leaves the woman to become the head of the household and the breadwinner, in addition to her other roles. Women become the protectors and the decision makers of their families and their communities. They are the ones that are dependent upon to earn money and ensure their families are fed and children can go to school. They become the negotiators to ensure their kids can go to school in many instances, and become facilitators of those types of dialogues and discussions within their families and their communities. Through our research, we've seen a lot of these instances happen. Our research is mostly in the northeast of Nigeria and Borno State. We've seen how civilian women are impacted by these different ways. So, for example, our researchers spoke to one woman who lost her son. He was attempting to flee when being chased by members of an armed opposition group, and they killed him right in front of their home. His mother found him, was obviously distressed, but for her, she saw that this was a part of a bigger issue, that men and boys in her community were being targeted in this way, and she wanted to see an end to it. So the next day, she started opening her home to these men and boys who were being targeted and provided them with women's clothing, including headscarves, so that they could escape undetected. And in doing so, she saved over 16 men and women in her community. And in these instances, we also see that women are putting themselves at grave risk because their male family members are being targeted, or even themselves. And in doing so, when they go out when they're living in camps or in areas affected by conflict, they then put themselves in way of harm by going out to collect the firewood and other needs for the family. And in doing so, they're making themselves also vulnerable to sexual violence, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, and abuse from other people that are supposed to provide protection. So all of this, comes into play because in our work that we do, we work in, again, the Northeast with different communities. And understanding these different concerns by civilians in conflict zones, we work with them to identify these different protection issues and find solutions to their concerns. And we do this by engaging with communities through the development and support of community protection committees. These committees are made up of people within the community that are well respected, that are known, have strong relationships, and we ensure that there is equal representation of men and women both within the community and also the leadership structures. Their role is to track, monitor, and take action on protection concerns, and we support them by reviewing civilian rights under international humanitarian law and other legal frameworks, and identifying and analyzing these threats and developing strategies to address them. And in many cases, these strategies involve doing advocacy straight to armed actors in their community. This helps to prioritize for the security and the military efforts that they need to be doing, or making changes that they may need to, and ensure that their operations are being done in a way that's reducing civilian harm. It helps bring a face to some of the more difficult questions and issues that need to be talked about, including sexual and gender-based violence. And it also provides an opportunity for them to educate the civilians in the communities that they're protecting on some of their issues that they're facing when it comes to trying to provide the protection. So ultimately what they're doing is creating a dialogue and starting to build trust. And I think that's maybe the first step when it comes to reducing civilian harm. All of this to say, this is what's happening on the ground. At the national level, there's been a recognition that this needs to be more prioritized. So there is now currently a draft policy on the protection of civilians that's gaining a lot of ground. So just very quickly about the policy, it recognizes that civilian harm is tragic and often unavoidable during conflict, but the policy aims to ensure that all security operations involving armed forces of Nigeria, including other security institutions, make every effort to minimize negative effects of conflict on the civilian population. It's applicable across all of the Nigerian government, including those security agencies and institutions, and it's applicable to all civilians across Nigeria as well, not just the ones in conflict. Yes, sorry, just going through very quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time. The policy itself, it aims to avoid and minimize civilian harm through efficient planning. So it aims to distinguish between civilians and combatants, verifying targets, gathering information, data collection. It aims to assess civilian harm during and after operations, so that there's an understanding of what's happening and how different operations need to be shifted in order to reduce those things. It aims to acknowledge the harms that do happen and wants to create a reporting mechanism and developing effective accountability measures and provide assistance to those affected by harm as a gesture of sympathy, whatever it may look like. It calls for transparency and information sharing, and it calls to develop a plan to mitigate unexploded ordinances as well. So it's looking at all the different aspects. Just a bit background. There was a recognized need to strengthen protection of civilians within the defense sector. So the policy was drafted, and through different roundtables and stakeholder discussions, including with several different ministries across the government of Nigeria, including the Ministry of Justice, National Legislator, African Center for Strategic Studies, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Force, or Corps, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. I don't want to sit here and list everyone, but it's multi-stakeholder approach. So the policy was then presented to the Vice President's office during the monthly interministerial committee task force for the Northeast. And that's where they recognized that, conflict can actually happen anywhere across the country and that the policy must be applicable across Nigeria. The National Human Rights Commission has really taken the lead to push this forward. They recognize that this is a policy that actually should have been in existence ages ago. So there's also been a validation meeting with multiple stakeholders, some of those mentioned, including others. But during this validation meeting, there was a recognition that that language needs to be strengthened in order to address different the civilian protections of women and girls. And so now there's stronger language in there about the protection of women and girls, including from gender-based violence, accountability mechanisms. It's a very survivor-centric approach that's included in there. So there's been several public commitments made to get this policy signed into law, and I think it's hopeful. And I think it's significant because the Nigerian government has really taken ownership of the policy from the very beginning up until now, and it's something to be proud of. This is the type of policy that focuses specifically on the protection of civilian men and women, and unfortunately it's uncommon. These types of policies only exist in Afghanistan, within NATO, and there are a few, like one or two other countries that are just discussing the idea. So, this is something that Nigeria is actually taking a leadership role in, and I think it's something worth noting. And the policy itself puts into action exactly what civilians want, right? Which is to be accounted for and thought of by those providing protection. No one wants to be a casualty at the end of the day. So it calls for resources to be allocated, strategies to be developed, and action and training to be conducted to help ensure the protection of civilians in conflict throughout Nigeria. And it actually also strengthens commitments made by the government already on several different human rights issues, including UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the National Action Plan that Nigeria has. So, if the policy is signed into law, there will be a need to push for implementation and accountability, and that's where civil society can get really involved and play a strong role. So I will leave you there.
I know we all have concerns and stuff that we want to talk about, but we'll just take one more presentation and then we can get to the discussion. Okay? So just give me like 2 minutes to quickly rush this presentation on health conditions of women. I'm sure a lot of us actually want to delve into women's health and children's health and nutrition and all that.
Can you
Because
please
it's all
tell
part
us
of social
before you go, can you
protection.
tell us who you are so the camera can who you are again?
Oh, okay. I am Chioma Kanu. I work with the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC. I'm a program manager. Okay, this isn't actually working. I actually need your help to get it unless you want me to
Just
Yeah,
go on
yes,
because
yeah.
of time.
Okay, so we are looking at health as a human right. If you're talking about social protection, you have to look at it through all angles. Okay, Prof has actually done a lot of work, talked about sleeplessness, talked about empowerment of women. I'm going to bring the health angle, and I want to make us understand that even international instruments, treaties, internationally actually provides that people, in fact, citizens, human beings, all of us should have health as a right. Coming down to our country, Nigeria, even the 1999 Constitution actually provides that health is a right. And in fact, there's a Maputo Protocol, which all of us, all the countries, 189 countries of the world, were signatories to, that actually provides that, in fact, let me even read it, that it establishes and strengthens the existing prenatal, delivery, and postnatal health and nutritional services for women during pregnancy and while they are breastfeeding. So it has this provision, and then we have other provisions, health acts and all that, that actually should be protecting the health rights of women. Unfortunately, we don't have all this in place. There is a lot of out-of-pocket spending for women, even when there is supposed to be the basic healthcare provision fund that should cater for small illnesses. But then again, what we found is that people actually dip their hands in their pockets to be able to provide for their health needs. And that is actually overwhelming at some times, because most people don't even have that much. They can't boast of a lot of money to be spending on health. So I bring it down to the situation of nutrition in Nigeria. Nearly 1,000 Nigerian children die of malnutrition-related causes every day, which makes it a total of 420,000 each year. Approximately 2.6 million Nigerian children under the age of 5 are actually severely acutely malnourished, and it puts Nigeria at 1/10 of the global total of malnourishment. It's not proper that our country will always take first in the wrong indices. So there are other challenges on the nutrition, like the stunting, the wasting. Then another thing you need to know is that mostly all the interventions on nutrition are donor-driven. That means it is the development partners that fund, nutrition for all the children in Nigeria. And then with all these donor exits, that donors are actually moving away from the country, we find that they are actually sending the message that all of us should take care of our health issues in the country. So that actually leaves us at a very vulnerable stage, because if ab initio we were not even taking care of our health, of the children's health, if the donors actually exit, what will now become of the children, the 2.6 million children that I spoke about that are severely acute malnourished? Okay, so these are the things we need to talk about. Then the causes of this malnutrition, the causes of health issues relating to women and children. One of them is abject poverty. Most people cannot even afford to eat 3 square meals a day. In fact, even the 1 meal that some of us or some of them can afford is not even adequate. They just manage, okay? Then there's ignorance. They don't even know what to do with their life, what to eat, even if there is food to eat. Then there is also lack of nutrition information and education and awareness. There's lack of political will actually to address malnutrition issues, because of course it's politics everybody wants to talk about. Nobody actually most people don't even know that nutrition is a health issue. So it's not something that people are happy and willing to be deliberating on. Then there's also the lack of understanding of the debilitating impact of malnutrition. you see, malnutrition is not just about, okay, I couldn't eat food today, so I'm hungry. It's not just about that. A severely acutely malnourished child cannot perform optimally well in future. The brain has actually been, affected, adversely, and that isn't good for our future generation. If we are talking about 2.6 million Nigerian children under the age of 5, then let us break down. If we have about 200 million Nigerians as a population, let's break it down in terms of male, female, aged, young, children, then children under the age of 5. We wouldn't have so many. So if we have up to 2.6 million of them actually undergoing severe acute malnutrition, we are in big trouble in the country. And we really need to start, addressing this issue. So, we are actually, it's not as if things haven't actually been done. There are some policy interventions. There is a tripartite agreement with donors that the government is actually working on as we speak. Unfortunately, it's not that tight. They don't ever meet up with, the agreement, because the donor would bring like a part of the support for nutrition. Then they expect the government to also, match it with some amount. But we find that they always don't. They pay lip service to that, and that actually makes those children that are severely acute malnourished even more vulnerable and very close to their grave. So we need some policy interventions, one of which is the support to development policies to ensure continuity of what they have now developed, to hand over this treatment of these children back to the government, which is the community management of acute malnutrition program. We also need to have prompt release of government counterparts cash contribution for nutrition activities. And then there's a need for government to also contribute to the efforts of what the donors are already doing, like the procurement of the ready-to-use therapeutic food. And then there's a need for them to prioritize timely release of budgets for nutrition. Also, we need to have clear guidelines to stop the abuse of RUTF. RUTF is ready-to-use therapeutic food, and we find that because of poverty, hunger, most mothers that their kids are given RUTF consume the RUTF. They eat it, okay, because it's made with floppy nuts, with ground nuts, and fortified with vitamins. So they eat it because they are hungry, or they sell it because it's costly, so that they can have money to use to buy other food to feed the rest of the family. Okay, so we also need to introduce home gardening. We used to have all these things, before. If you want to make stew, you could pluck curry leaves at the background and use it to make your stew, and it's better nourished. So we also need to strengthen the school feeding program. It's already ongoing, but we are not even sure about how much nourishment the children are actually getting. So in terms of civil society media engagement, there needs to be more awareness, continuous advocacy, and then the airing of nutrition programs in the media houses, so that, of course, those that don't even understand these issues can actually begin to do. Because we know that from our engagement, some mothers that are holding babies that are severely acute malnourished wouldn't even understand that that is the problem. They think that they have been bewitched, because they are so tiny that somebody may have bewitched them, and they don't take them to the hospital for treatment, and then the child actually might lose his or her life eventually. I have some pictures here that you can't see, unfortunately, of these children that are severely acute malnourished that actually need help, as soon as possible, as we speak. So those are the pictures that you don't actually want to see, but it's not that I picked them from the internet. I went to the SEMAM site where these children were, and I saw and I picked, I took pictures and all that. So please, while we deliberate, we should also think of other means, other ways we could support, the feeding of our children. And then, in fact, the health system is really in comatose. You know, some people don't have the small amount of money, less than $1, to be able to even feed, let alone, you know, take care of themselves. That is why most of the time they go for, you know, herbal medicine, just pluck leaves and cook and drink. You know, when the government should actually provide at least the basic minimal, you know, fund for nutrition, for health. But we don't have all that. And I think if we are seriously talking about protection, social safety net for women, we should actually be deliberating on, you know, the health of women and children. Thank you so much for listening. I hope I didn't